Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another show. My dear brothers and sisters, I have to tell you, I count it great joy to be able to talk to a history maker right now, Justice Scott Neville of the Supreme Court. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. Now, as you saw in the opening shot, I don't have to remind you of who you are and what prestigious shoes that you're walking in as we speak. You're the newly Supreme Court Justice, vacated, of course, by Justice Charles Freeman, but you've been on the appellate court for quite some time.
That's true.
Was it 10 years?
14 years.
14 years. Okay. So you're not a stranger to the courts.
No, I'm not a stranger. Not a stranger to the appellate court.
That's right. But let me say, so much I want to talk to you about, because ordinarily, and I have to be honest with you, many of the people, even though the judicial branch is so important, don't get a chance to dig deep because there are things you're limited that you can discuss because you're the law, the highest law in the state of Illinois. You never know what you may have to comment on and what you may not be permitted to comment on. But having said that, you do get a chance to write opinions, and after they've been written, we have the freedom to dig through them and see how that you operate.
That's
now, to show you on another level, Kavanaugh, who's being the Supreme Court appointee by Mr. Trump, they're now scrutinizing him and looking over his record. They're even making commercials. So I'm happy that the black community will get a chance, and the community at large get a chance to see you again on this level. Okay, so congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I should say that. Now, as I say, everybody may not know Justice Scott Neville, but you've certainly been around, you've practiced law, so just pretend that nobody really knows you before this program. Tell us who you are, a little bit about the justice.
Well, very briefly, I grew up in Bronzeville. I like to say that I'm the Illinois Supreme Court Justice who came from 43rd Street to LaSalle Street. I'm a product of Chicago's public schools. I graduated from DuSable High School. I'm also a graduate of Washington University School of Law. My first job was as a law clerk. I was the first black man to clerk for an Illinois appellate court justice. So I've been practicing appellate law for the last 44 years.
That's a long time.
That is a very long, it's a lifetime. In
Yes,
fact,
it is.
not only a long time, a lifetime.
Yeah.
And then I was fortunate enough for my predecessor, Justice Charles Freeman, to appoint me to the circuit court in 1999. I was elected in 2000. Once again, he recommended and the Supreme Court approved my appointment to the appellate court in 2004. I was elected in 2012. Finally, the Supreme Court and Justice Freeman, with Justice Freeman's resignation, appointed me to the Illinois Supreme Court. As you've already pointed out, those are tough shoes to fill. Justice Freeman served for 42 years in the circuit court, appellate court, and Supreme Court. 28 of those years were served on the Illinois Supreme Court. During his service on the appellate court and the Supreme Court, he wrote over 600 opinions.
Yeah.
Those are big shoes to fill.
That's right. An opinion, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because even though there are a lot of things we may not know originally, but opinions are really telling.
Yes,
and a lot of them we don't investigate, but you've done something already remarkable we'll get into shortly, because there's a unique case that you voiced your first opinion last week. Yeah, I know about it. And so I don't want you to think I'm a lawyer, but I just want you to know I'm engaged in these kind of things, and I'm quite happy to see that opinion because it's very meaningful and we'll give you a chance to explain it.
Okay, very good. As I said, not only did he write over 600 opinions, but Justice Freeman also had an opportunity to appoint a number of people to the circuit court and the appellate court. And that's the thing that people don't realize how important the job is appointing other judges to the circuit court and the appellate court.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to compliment my colleagues on the Illinois Supreme Court. They, I would say in their wisdom,
Yeah.
saw fit to appoint me, even though they probably reversed me more than any other judge who sat on the appellate court in criminal cases. But because of their interest in diversity, they elevated me to the Supreme Court, and now I don't have to be concerned about being reversed anymore.
Yeah, because you are in the position to do the reversing. Well, allow me to say this. I had one of your colleagues on whom I always enjoy having on, Justice Ann Burke, and she spoke very highly of you, and I was very pleased to hear that. So that's something that you need to know.
Well, I want to say that Justice Burke is the senior justice in Cook County, soon to be the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court. So I am very pleased to be serving with her. She's been a very warm leader, and I recognize and acknowledge her leadership. She's been very helpful to me.
All right, let me just say to the audience, brothers and sisters, we're streaming live all over the entire world. All you have to do is go to crowtv.org, Ustream. We're also on Facebook. We're on YouTube. And you can call us. If you want to call us, the phone number is 773-434-6625 or 434-6631. You can email us at crow@crow.org. And for time's sake, if you want to have a conversation on Facebook and later we check it out, that's fine. But I'd like for you to engage our newly appointed Supreme Court Justice for all of his experience that he has had, because what he has not told you, that it'll be a few years, but he'll have to run for that seat again, and we're going to have to tell you the particulars about that. Now, I understand that someone want to talk to you already. Do you, ma'am?
No, I don't.
Okay, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, assalamu alaikum, Brother Munir. Sister Nora calling from Camden, New Jersey.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I want to thank you for that explanation of the role of his role in the appellate court. But my question is, as someone representing the judicial branch of government, how by reading your opinions or how by writing your opinions can you affect change on the ground level? You know, our communities, I'm in Camden, New Jersey, you're in Chicago, and, you know, crime is just, you know, at an all-time high. And we are seeing some extreme violence. So how can we look to the judicial branch to affect change here on the ground?
Well, before you answer that, let me just say, brothers and sisters, I'm glad that my sister asked that question. I know one of the opinions, he's going to get a chance to talk about it, but you're still in my thunder on that, but I'm going to give him a chance to answer. If I don't have any other callers right now, do I have any other? Okay, I'll let you address that right now.
Well, here's the way a Supreme Court justice can affect things that are going on the ground. Remember, in Illinois, the Supreme Court is the supreme law of the state of Illinois. Now, we must recognize that the final decision, the ultimate decision, is made by the United States Supreme Court. So decisions in Illinois are not going to determine what happens in your state, but they can be considered persuasive authority. But the role of courts is to prescribe rules that the citizens are supposed to follow and the police are supposed to follow. And that's how we affect what's going on the ground. We prescribe the roles or the rules that citizens and the police officers are supposed to follow when they interact.
But allow me to interject here. But Illinois, cannot be overruled by anybody else except the Supreme Court
That's correct.
of the land. No appellate level other than the Supreme Court.
That's the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
You're right.
US, right.
Only the U.S. Supreme Court can overrule a decision by the Illinois Supreme Court. And as I pointed out, an Illinois Supreme Court decision is only persuasive authority in your state. It's not binding.
Well, let's talk about something. You mentioned that the Supreme Court has overturned you before on the appellate level.
Right.
And oftentimes people don't understand how important opinions are. You know, now you wrote something that's really telling to me, and this is something, I want to read it if you don't mind. Divided Illinois Supreme Court, unconstitutional convictions can't be used to end parental rights. This is the topic. But you wrote something, and if you could kind of help me out a little, because even though it was unconstitutional, it still was out there. It could be used to circumvent progress by an inmate or two. And maybe if you put it in your fine legal terms, that people could understand it. Could we talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that it was so important, because if you have written opinions on the appellate level, how important were those opinions? Well, they become important if you were able to reverse an injustice. Doesn't mean how many cases you took, but how many meaningful opinions that you wrote.
Well, here's the thing. This case is very important because it affects many lives. This man, in this case, it's NRA-NG, his parental rights were terminated.
Okay.
And his parental rights were terminated because he had 3 felony convictions.
Right.
But the Supreme Court had determined that one of the felony convictions, the statute that was used to convict him, was unconstitutional,
Right.
which meant the conviction was void.
Right.
There is a legal maxim, and that maxim is that a void conviction cannot be used for any purpose. Well, my learned colleagues who wrote the dissent took the position that that void conviction could be used if the defendant failed to vacate it.
Meaning, if he didn't know his rights, he didn't raise the issue, you could take advantage of it, a zealous prosecutor, if you will.
Exactly.
Okay.
And as a consequence, he could lose his right to parent his child. That's unfair. The legal maxim. I had a law professor, and he said since the rule of law runneth not to the contrary. Well, this is a legal maxim, that a void conviction cannot be used for any purpose. My colleagues in the dissent said that he could not raise that issue in this termination of parental rights case. He had to file a separate proceeding. I said, no, that void conviction can be raised in any proceeding. Therefore, we reversed the decision, we affirmed the appellate court, which had reversed the trial court, and said that conviction could not be used to terminate his rights. Now, we remanded the case back to the circuit court, and if they can find some other reason,
Yeah.
other than that void conviction,
In your opinion, your colleagues, you would stand the test of time.
oh yes,
Okay.
this
was
stand-
law. Okay.
as I said, because of this maxim, void conviction simply cannot be used.
But let me ask you, Justice. Now, this is important, of course. But how do we get the message out to the people in general? Because let's face it, a lot of people have looked down on the law. They don't quite frankly understand it. Many times they think people get off with a slap on the wrist if it's them. And how can we get people more interested in the law? And as you mentioned, you come from Bronzeville, from 43rd Street to LaSalle Street, but that was not always the norm, and it's still not the norm.
It's not the normal route to get to the
But
Supreme
you're saying
Court.
there's an opportunity that justice will prevail if you're in the game.
But I think people have to put themselves in the game. You know, I've talked to some of my mentors, and they've explained to me that you can't get a crop unless you till the field. It takes 9 months for a woman to have a baby. Some things simply take time. I told you I worked for 44 years before I got to the Supreme Court. But people have to take an interest in the law, and they have to study the law in order to determine what their rights are. Now, you know, there are a couple of other things I'm advocating. I recognize that most of the people in the state of Illinois and in the county of Cook are not lawyers. I also understand that over 50% of all the litigants in cases pending in Cook County or in the state of Illinois involve non-attorneys. I am proposing, and I'm going to advocate with my colleagues, that lawyers be required to represent unrepresented litigants in order to fulfill their pro bono requirements and their continuing legal education requirements.
You're going to make that part of the continuing?
Well, I'm going to make that proposal. It's not part. But you see, I acknowledge that most people aren't lawyers. I don't expect for most people to become lawyers. But there are enough lawyers to assist people who are unrepresented litigants, and that's one of the things I'm going to propose to my colleagues.
So the move that the chief judge made, along with the public defender's office, in making sure that unrepresented people, before they are charged, they have the right to an attorney and the right to call one, and that's in fact is reality now.
But no, it's not. See, remember, it's only in a criminal case that you have a constitutional right to counsel.
I'm happy you clarified that, sir.
Yeah, the Constitution provides that if you are a criminal defendant and if you're going to be deprived of your liberty, you have a right to counsel. And you see, that's one of the arguments that my colleagues make. I'm talking about civil cases.
Yeah.
There is no constitutional right to counsel in a civil case. Therefore, I'm advocating that lawyers become members of what they use in the federal courts. See, this isn't a new idea. In the federal courts at 219 South Dearborn, if you're a member of the trial bar, you have to represent an unrepresented litigant. They assign you a case. I am proposing that in Illinois, to make up for this void, to make up for citizens who don't know or understand the law, that lawyers be required to assist them with their cases.
Very good. You mind if we take another call?
No, please take another call.
Caller, you're on the air.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Munir.
Wa alaikum salam.
And greetings to you, Judge. Is it Neville or Neville?
Neville.
I say Neville, but I'll accept Neville. There's a question as to whether I'm related to the Neville brothers.
You know, that's what I want to know. No, I'm just kidding. I thought about that for sure, but that isn't my question. I want to first congratulate you on that position. As I read here on the Tribune website, often that position or many positions that are appointed by judges have been by clout, and people have been questioning their credentials. It's good to see that your credentials were not questioned and that everyone felt that you were qualified. So I want to say that first of all. Secondly, I think that is an excellent idea, what you just said about being able to do the pro bono work, because I have been foolish enough to try to represent myself and did not do very well, to say the least, and eventually I got an attorney because I looked like a total fool trying to argue a case. But actually, I have a question saying all of that. When it comes, what is the final verdict on some things? I know Johnson & Johnson has a case out now where they've been accused of having baby powder that caused ovarian cancer, and they were found to be in contempt or found guilty and charged with having to pay out hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. But before that case even finished, they said they were going to appeal it and that the people will never see any money because they're going to tie it up. So what is the final step? I know through the Supreme Court, but when it comes to the Illinois court, what would be our final chance to go before a judge? Thank you.
Well, let me just say this. You know, as a judge, you can't render an advisory opinion. And so I can't really comment on the Johnson & Johnson case. I don't know if that case is pending in the Illinois courts. But let me say this. Every citizen has an absolute right to appeal his or her case in Illinois if there's a final judgment to the Illinois appellate court. You have an absolute right to appeal. If a corporation like Johnson & Johnson lost the case, once there's a judgment in that case and the case is final, they have a right to appeal. If the plaintiffs who were injured, explain were injured, if they lost the case, then they would have a right to appeal. Now here's where it gets tricky. The case does not automatically go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has what's known as discretionary jurisdiction. And the Supreme Court, of which I'm now a member, we only decide those cases that we exercise our discretion on and decide they're important enough for us to hear. So let me just review what I've said very briefly. You have an absolute right as a citizen to take your case to the appellate court, at least in the state of Illinois. The Supreme Court has discretion, so your case may or may not come to the Supreme Court.
Well, let me say, you mentioned that case. That case is still pending because they did appeal it, and they are trying to tie it up for as long as they can. But it was an enormous judgment made against those persons, I can tell you that. And it probably will be tied up for some time. But let me also say to you, Judge, I want to go back to something you said, that you don't have a right to an appeal unless it's a criminal case. You know, now you didn't say that you don't have a right, but in the civil cases, you would like to see that.
In the civil cases, I'd like to see people receive the assistance of attorneys. Notice what the caller said. She said she had a very difficult time representing herself. Well, you know that old maxim, a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. Well, I'm not saying that about the caller, but it's better if you go and hire somebody else and let them take a look at your case.
Let's talk about arbitration and not arbitration, but when you have to reprimand judge, attorney registration, discipline committee. Now, there have been some problems in the past, that there have been some judges even disbarred that we have not even known about, and some who have the uncanny thought of representing themselves as lawyers even though they know they've been disbarred. What is the Supreme Court doing about weeding those kind of people out, or putting enough fear in them about the punishment that no longer occurs?
Well, remember now, the Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission is responsible for managing the activities of lawyers.
Right.
There's a Judicial Inquiry Board that's responsible for reviewing the complaints filed against judges. The Supreme Court and the Judicial Inquiry Board are separate and apart. It's a separate, independent entity. Now, the Supreme Court ultimately is responsible for determining what happens to lawyers. We do not have that same responsibility with respect to judges. Okay. So we need to understand that. Well, so if a lawyer's out of line, that ultimately might come before the Supreme Court. If it's a judge, there's a certain review process for judges.
What type of judges sit on the Judicial Council?
As I recall, I think there's one Supreme Court justice, there's one or two appellate court justices, usually you have a circuit court justice, and then you have some private citizens. I am not quite sure about the makeup of the board and the commission.
Now, you also mentioned that you were appointed on the appellate court prior to running. So this is not some foreign to people. Periodically, there's a vacancy for the courts, an appellate court, the Supreme Court justices will choose some of those, right?
Right, that's right.
And you also have some that remain judges on the judicial level, but they are assigned to the Supreme Court. How does that work? How many vacancies or how many appellate justices?
All right, let me say this. I'm not sure as to the exact number. There are about 234 circuit court judges. Now keep in mind there are also a number of associate judges. It's my understanding that the total number of associate and circuit court judges is somewhere around 400.
Okay.
In Cook County, there are 24 appellate court justices. In the remainder of the state, there are about 32, 34. So there's somewhere between 56 and 58 appellate court justices statewide. There's 7 justices on the Supreme Court. The Constitution empowers the Supreme Court to fill a vacancy on the circuit court, the appellate court, and on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has that power.
But nevertheless, the judges, in whatever case, this is an exclusive club in totality, right? There's not that many. I think even if it's 900 in the whole state.
Right, that's right. Yeah. That's right. That's
okay.
right.
But
not exclusive in terms of everybody having an opportunity. See, the great thing that makes the state of Illinois so great, in my opinion, is judges are elected. So even if someone is appointed, they have to run, and the citizens are provided with an opportunity to pass on the qualifications of that judge.
Now, you may not be able to comment on this, but I think it's worth my bringing up because, you know, we have sub-circuits now.
Yes.
Which has enabled a little bit more balance. Let's face it, for black judges in particular, and some of those who forged that way still, in my opinion, have not been recognized as such. You know, we know them personally, like Senator Brookins, who sacrificed himself on the state level to lose a case to make sure that the sub-circuits came into being. And a lot of people I see run in the sub-circuit. Now, even though this may not be something that you are thinking of, being a Supreme Court justice, but you've been in the business for 44 years, is there some kind of committees that get together and acknowledge people who forged the way in certain areas for others? You know, maybe an award that's given out in the judicial. I'm just asking, have you ever known that?
Well, I'm aware of organizations and entities that sometimes give people awards who have blazed the trail.
Oh, that's what I mean. Okay.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay.
I know Senator Brookings well. I know Representative and later Judge Anthony Young.
Yeah.
I know Representative Paul Williams.
Okay.
But I also know Miguel DeValle, who had something to do with the sub-circuit legislation. I also know Senator Keats. In fact,
I didn't know him.
All of those men were honored by the newly formed Latino Judges Association.
Isn't that something?
And I want to take this opportunity to certainly compliment them for their efforts. Now, the thinking behind that sub-circuit legislation was to diversify the judiciary,
right,
not only for blacks, but to open up a way for Latinos, that is, to make judgeships available to them, but also to make judgeships available to Republicans, because this is a Democratic county, and there are a couple of far northwest suburban sub-circuits where Republicans have a better opportunity to serve. It hasn't worked that way, but I think the thinking behind the legislation was to diversify the judiciary. Now, I think I'm speaking for the remainder of the court or the other members of the court. I think the diversity is a good thing. I think that's why they put me on the Illinois Supreme Court to make sure there was some diversity.
Well, I'm sure that is the reason. The only reason that I raised that issue, because I could go back and think somebody have to sacrifice because the gerrymandering and the various things that were going on politically. And I'm saying that the more people are enlightened about things that took place, the more they're likely to get involved in things today, in my opinion. And I don't want to downplay the judicial branch of government, because even though, like I say, you're limited to talk about some things, but I would go back to when the state of Illinois didn't want to pay the judges. It was some governor, I forget who, it escapes me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I remember there was a problem with our salary.
Yeah, with y'all salary.
But the Supreme Court solved it.
So that's right. But they solved it because they were the judicial branch, and there was 3 branches of government that exercised their power.
Well, in fairness, the executive branch has a right to express an opinion.
Yeah.
But the ultimate determiner with respect to the constitutionality of legislation is the Supreme Court,
okay.
And they determined that legislation was unconstitutional.
Okay,
and struck it.
Now, brothers and sisters, let me say, we're talking to Justice Scott Neville, who's seeking to retain this office, and it is a 10-year term. And even though there's no reason to talk about it today, because he will be in that position until there's an election in 2020.
That's right, in 2020, March of 2020.
And so some of you may want to quiz him or ask him a question or two, and you might want to know him. You may not know him. There are other people that are on the court that sometimes they judge their colleagues and talk about you. You seem to be friendly with your contemporaries, but that is a prestigious position. So I'm hoping that people would want to talk to you. Those of you who are watching on Facebook, those of you who are watching on YouTube, and who are streaming live. Now I'm going to take a break shortly, but prior to doing that, again, the phone number is 773-434-6625 or 434-6631. Remember what I told you, that judiciary is important. Everybody's going to need a judge one way or the other. So I'd like to see more people involved. And you know, even during the election, the judges are way down the list as if they're not important at all. And people many times forget them. As a person who's been pleased with the law, and at least for 44 years we know your environment, do you go around and speak to college students or law students? Or you? And some people say there's a shortage of lawyers. I don't believe them, but well, what are you hearing on that?
Let me say this. I certainly mentor other judges. I mentor law students. I mentor high school students. I recently had a group of high school students from the south suburbs, and they got a tour of the court. And I do that because of something my mentor, Justice R. Eugene Pincham, taught me. He said, you can't be what you can't see. And I brought those students down. They got an opportunity to tour the courthouse. We had lunch. We got an opportunity to talk.
At whose expense?
At my expense.
Okay.
But I think the highlight of the day was to permit those students to sit on the bench in those chairs and to take pictures of themselves. Now, I added this caveat: you can't put it on Facebook. But I did want them to have that picture next to their desk so they could envision themselves one day sitting as a member of the court. I want to demystify the judiciary. I don't want students to feel that it's so far away that they can't accomplish it. I mean, if you come off of 43rd Street and get to the Supreme Court, well, I'd like to think anybody could do it.
Yeah,
if I did it, anybody could do it.
Well, let me say this. I want to thank Justice Freeman and others that I had a chance to visit what I call the apartments in Springfield, and I got a chance to sit on that bench. And, of course, I was on the Human Rights Commission and we had a mock kind of a trial there. You all were so gracious, and I say you all because you're an extension of that court, and we were treated very nice. And as I said, just to watch it in operation and to see that was very, very enlightening to me. So I know what young people would feel if they could see it, because I didn't practice law, but I wanted to be a lawyer. And I was so impatient that I didn't want to go to law school. But I knew people like you that I felt that would go, and by the time you get out, you would have shared so much with me, it would be no need for me to go. But I missed my turn.
No, it's not too late.
Now, don't tell me it's not too late, because
not too
they
late.
always say that. But what made you love the law so? That, you know, growing up in the community, I know your father was a lawyer.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I had a great love for the law. Not only my father, but my uncle. And I grew up during the 60s, during the civil rights struggle. And I thought I had an obligation to get out and try to defend others and to right some things that I thought were wrong. I mean, it all started when I was at Culver Stockton College. After Dr. Martin Luther King was killed, I convinced the college that they needed a more diverse campus, and they hired me to go out and recruit students. When I started at Culver Stockton in 1966, there were 10 students there. When I left in 1970, there were about 50 black students on the campus. So I've always been interested in bringing about change. I went to Washington University. We didn't bring in as many students, but certainly we started talking to the administration about diversifying the law school community, and that has occurred. So I've always been part of what I consider to be the vanguard. I like to see things change, but I think diversity is important, particularly here in Chicago.
Well, let me ask you before we take a break. And, you know, I could ask you questions all day, and I probably will have to. Somehow, sometime it appears to me that people are a bit naive about the opportunities that they have. So I want to understand the Supreme Court in its entirety. Now, you're not just writing opinions, but you reverse, or you hear cases. Some cases you reject, which you have the right to do. You think over it a lot, and sometimes you come back and say, we're not going to deal with that. Can anybody force you all? Is there any kind of law that can force you all to accept a case? And give me some of the authority that you have and that you don't have.
Well, there is a constitutional provision that says that if a lower court judge, either at the circuit court or the appellate court, declares a statute unconstitutional, we must take that case.
You must take it, not just criminal.
It doesn't. I don't care what kind of statute it is. If the statute is declared unconstitutional, we have to consider that case. But
they can do that at that lower level?
Oh, yeah, they can declare a statute unconstitutional.
Is that right?
That's
Can
absolutely.
you give me an example?
Well,
I mean, I'm sorry, I've never heard that. They can determine.
Well, remember, that's where it starts. The cases start at the lower level.
I understand that, but I'm saying most times the lower level judges are being overruled by
Yeah, they may be overruled, but you see, one case does not come to mind where a statute was declared unconstitutional. But if a judge takes that position, that this statute is unconstitutional, that case comes directly to us. Now, something else can occur. The appellate court can determine that a case is of importance and that the Supreme Court should hear it. Now, that case comes, but we don't have to accept it. But they can take the position that this case is so important that we think the Supreme Court should hear it.
But capital cases, you must take.
Well, remember, the death penalty was declared unconstitutional.
Right.
Until that statute was declared unconstitutional, if someone was sentenced to death, we would get those cases.
Okay,
but that's no longer a problem.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay, well, brothers and sisters, what we're going to do now, we're going to take a quick break. and then we'll come back and talk more on the other side. And if you are there, brothers and sisters, this is Justice Scott Neville. Get to know him. Give him a call when we return. 773-434-6625, 434-6631. We'll be right back.
The Munir Muhammad Show is brought to you by ComEd. For tips on managing your energy bill and helping the environment, call 1-800-EDISON-1 or visit ComEdCare.com.
ComEd Smart Ideas presents the power of energy efficiency. Altogether, you have saved over $700 million, all because you took part in our energy efficiency programs, like our central AC rebates, fridge and freezer recycling, and lighting discounts. The small changes you've made to be more energy efficient really add up. The math is easy. ComEd's energy efficiency programs equal savings for you. Learn more about energy efficiency at ComEd.com/home savings. ComEd, powering lives.
I love you, Emma.
At Cook County, your health is our priority at every stage of life. Our team of primary care physicians is focused on keeping your entire family healthy with convenient hours and locations throughout Cook County so you can focus on what matters. We've served the people of Cook County for more than 180 years. We're ready to serve them now with today's modern medicine. We are Cook County Health. Look at us now.
Searching for a restaurant that serves delicious home-cooked meals at an affordable price like your grandmother used to make? Well, the search is over. Stop by McAuthor's, the new talk of Chicago. We offer a warm atmosphere with friendly service and excellent meals ranging from carry-out, dine-in, or catering for your special events. McAuthor's is open 7 days per week from 11 a.m. until 9 p.m. Come visit us at
5412
West Madison Street or call us at 773-261-2316.
This portion of the Munir Muhammad Show is brought to you by East Lake Management, innovative solutions for building communities of the future today.
We're back, and brothers and sisters, I am so thankful. What a lovely picture of Aretha and my friend James. Knew this man ever since I was 7 years old, and I'm doing a special tribute to him. So stay tuned, you'll see that. But there's so many questions that we need asked and answered. The importance of you voting, observing of the court. You got to look into it. In fact, well, what happens when there's dissent?
Well, the dissent just remains part of the decision. But what the readers or the viewers need to understand is, if the makeup of the court changes, if, for example, I am no longer on the court, then that fourth vote may side with the dissent, which means that the majority now becomes the dissent. What does that mean? That means citizens in the state of Illinois get to decide who's on the court. If you don't have if you don't vote, then someone who does not think like you may get on the court, and then they cast that fourth vote doing something that's adverse to your interest. If you go and vote and support someone who thinks like you, then the decision that we made last Thursday remains in place. But it's in the voters' hands.
And that's what we need to understand, brothers and sisters. And it's very important that you be observant, but you can ask a question. I told you the phone number is 773-434-6625 or 773-434-6631. I know the number is there because that's the way we talk to you all the time. So caller, you're on the air.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Munir.
Wa alaikum salam.
And good evening to the Justice. I continue to ask this question because I get extremely frustrated around election time and selecting judges. So I would like for the Justice to give us his opinion or give us some insight on how to go about selecting judges. And let me just mention that case that we had here in Illinois where the jury had decided that the police officer was guilty of shooting someone, and the justice overturned it because the jurors had said that they thought that the police officer was afraid for his life. This is the kind of thing that causes so much frustration when you're in the voting booth, because we have pamphlets, people say one thing, but when they get on the bench, it's something totally different. So I would appreciate whatever insight you would like to give us this evening as we get ready for the November election.
Well,
Thank you.
I think a voter has a responsibility to be informed. And you inform yourself by reading things about the various people. You have a responsibility, in my opinion, before you go to the polls, to maybe Google all the people who are on the ballots, whether they're running for judge or governor, and look at their records. You see, I think you measure people not by what they say, but by what they've done. And you need to go and look and see what kind of record these candidates have, including judges. If you'll notice, I have not commented on that case that you talked about, because that's a case that could potentially come to the Illinois Supreme Court. So I'm not going to address that, but I'm going to answer your other question. You've got to Google or read all the literature on all the judges so that you know who you're dealing with, so when you go into the polls, you'll know who to vote for. Of course, another way to do it is, if you have politicians that you trust, look at the literature they have. See who they're recommending. But you know, this is like civics. You gotta understand, you have a personal responsibility to vote. While I'm at it, you also have a responsibility to serve on juries. See, if you had been, if they had called you for jury service, if you had been on that jury, maybe you would not have made that decision. But you see, when I was a trial court judge, I saw a lot of people trying to get off of juries, not recognizing that many lives have been lost and a lot of blood has been shed so people can serve on juries. Notwithstanding that fact, people do not want to serve. But if you have a civic responsibility, a duty to serve on juries and to vote, but before you vote, you have a duty to educate yourself.
You know, I think that was well said. Well, let me say, brothers and sisters, if maybe you don't want to talk to their justice, but you want to call a friend and tell them we're streaming live and we're winding down now because, after all, we can't keep him forever. But we've tried to keep him long enough so something may resonate that you would want to discuss. Now, there was a time that there was some difficulty in some of that Batten situation. Can you talk a little bit about that? Batson.
Okay. You know, Batson is a U.S. Supreme Court case, and it simply holds that lawyers cannot use their peremptory challenges to exclude people from the jury now because of their race. That's what Batson dealt with. But Batson has been expanded. You can't do it because of their sex, because of their religion, because of their sexual orientation. I've had a couple of opportunities to comment on Batson. In fact, I have reversed a case because of Batson, and I dissented in a criminal case because, in my view, the state had used its peremptory challenges to exclude blacks from the jury. But once again, you see, you've got to go to the courthouse, you've got to be willing to serve as a juror for that to even become an issue. If you don't like the way things are being done, you've got to get involved. You've got to make things happen. That's what I've done as a lawyer. I'm involved. I'm engaged. I very much want to make sure that things are fair. You know, my motto is equal justice for all. That means no one is unseen, no one is unheard. It does not mean black justice or white justice, poor justice or rich justice. It simply means equal justice for all.
But what I would like to ask you, you know, as you say, you've been a judge, you consider for 44 years.
Well, a lawyer 44, a judge about almost 20.
Well, same thing. You've been, you were clerking, you were doing something in that area. But now you at the top of the heap, if you will. Now you've been a judge. I mean, certainly finances have their way of having an impact, but I don't think it's that much money that differentiates. So what is it about being on the Supreme Court that becomes the ultimate to you? You've been the appellate, you know, and you've been judicial, but you seem to have a glow that perhaps we need to dig deep into. I've known you for some time, but is it contagious? I mean, is it something so special you can't talk about it, or what is it that you want people to know how you feel?
Well, let me say this. Certainly it is a high honor to be elevated to the Illinois Supreme Court. It means that my voice is heard. On the appellate court, if I had written this special concurrence, it would not have the meaning it has being on the Supreme Court, because the decisions that we make are the supreme law in the state of Illinois.
So you know that's impactful.
I would hope that it's impactful. And I just tell people, even though I am one of 7, this little light of mine, I'm going to make it shine. That's why I made the decision in this NRANG.
I was there when you gave your talk, you know, and your acceptance of this prestigious position. Your father's no longer with you, right?
Right.
But you and your sister, who's a lawyer as well, right?
Right.
So you all just like lawyering? What was it that your genes were so unique in justice, or you just admired your father so much?
Well, remember, I have 4 sisters and 1 brother. Only 2 of us, a third of my siblings, elected law. But we simply are people who are interested in service. You know, PUSH is People United to Save or Serve Humanity. I think Martin Luther King was a public servant, but I think R. Eugene Pincham was a public servant. Thurgood Marshall was a public servant. I feel my job as a Supreme Court justice, I'm just serving the people, and I'm happy to do it.
Are you pleased to know that your mentor, R. Eugene Pincham, you ended up being on the Supreme Court, which he might have realized had he not been, well, some say forced to retire, but I'm sure you wouldn't agree with that. But nevertheless, you made it to the Supreme Court. He didn't. Are there any thoughts about that?
Well, my only thought is I think that Justice R. Eugene Pincham would have made a wonderful Supreme Court justice. He was a legal star. He's in that pantheon of great jurists and lawyers. I don't think that I'm quite there, but I am just trying to do my part.
Well, I'm sure you've done your part. Well, on my point, I think the world for Justice Charles Freeman, who I think was unique in his own, and I'll always be indebted to him for introducing me to so much about the course. Thank you for watching. May Allah bless you with the light of understanding as I greet you in peace. Assalamu alaikum.